Good morning, everyone. Hope you had a great weekend. Today, we're just gonna go over a couple things. If you are a part of the BAREIS MLS, they made a little announcement last week. I just wanted to cover that real quick in case you missed that. And then if you didn't see the notification come out from CAR or your local association about the forms update that was supposed to happen today, actually quite a few of them actually got delayed. We'll go over that. And then we're going to talk about how you as a buyer's agent are going to get compensated after August 17th of this year when, we're supposed to make the switch with using compensation agreements when dealing on the buyer side. So I say we go ahead and get started. Let me adjust my screen. Okay. So if you're a BAREIS user, they are going to make their MLS change, looks like around August 12th. Some MLSs are starting to make changes already with the compensation field, the BAC field, the buyer's agent compensation field. CRMLS already is implementing a change with that. They added in what's called the concession and price field, and depending on what version of CRMS you're using, whether it's Paragon, Matrix, or Flex, depends on what those fields look like. So the concession and price field now could be a few fields depending on what version you're on. But BAREIS made their announcement last week that they are going to be removing their buyer agent compensation field on the 12th. So still have a few more weeks. They said compensations field will be removed from listing entry and display on BAREIS. BAREIS Plus and BAREIS rules will prohibit posting any offer, compensation, or commission for brokers or agents anywhere in the MLS, including remarks field, attached documents, or virtual media. This is kind of the same trend I'm seeing with the other MLSs too. So you're not going to be able to put it in the remarks section or anything like that, but it looks like most of the MLSs are coming up with a different way to do this, which is the concessions and price field. Could be a yes or no toggle, and then you might be able to make some notes in there. All historical broker co-op info will be removed from display in BAREIS on August 12th, and this information will no longer be provided to any BAREIS data feed. So if you have a listing that's going to be rolling over past that, you may want to go in there and make your adjustment. If they add in some sort of concessions and price field or something like that, I'm going to guess they're going to add in some sort of alternative way to express some sort of concession that the seller is willing to make. Also, the chat is open. If you have questions on anything, please put it in the chat. Or if you want to ask live, I'll just unmute you. So new forms released. So they were supposed to come out well, actually tomorrow, but they got delayed. So we had gone over a couple new forms, which were the limited buyer representation form and the open house sign-in. We went over that, I think, 2 weeks ago. They have released some information on these two forms. Well, guess what? They're delaying them. And here's what happened. So they delayed the release because they received a civil investigation demand from the Department of Justice seeking information about these forms. Updates about a new release date will be posted on the CAR website. And more than likely your association's keeping you up to date with this stuff. So, if you don't have email notifications coming from the board, you may want to ask them just so you can stay up to date with what's going on with changes, what they're going to be doing with their MLS, things like that. So these are the ones that are not going to be released. So the residential listing agreement, we're going to remain on the current version of it. Obviously, they're not getting rid of the listing agreement. They're just not going to be releasing the updated one that they were supposed to release tomorrow. The open residential listing agreement, the RRLAS, I couldn't find that because they did delete that page of upcoming forms off their site, and they made an adjustment to it, which I do have a link to that in this. So I'm going to post this as usual, this presentation PDF in the replay in our Facebook group. I'm guessing that was a new version of the residential lease after sale. The commercial, the vacant land listing agreements, basically all the listing agreements are, the new release of them is getting delayed. The DM/LA, I'm guessing this is demand for mediation on the listing side. I couldn't locate that one either. Modification of terms, so MTLA, it looks like they're going to take the modification of terms form, which is currently one form that has both listing and buyer agency agreement on it. Looks like they're going to split those out is what it's looking like. So, and then the open house visitor non-agency. So we just went over that form. Unfortunately, it looks like there may or may not be changes to it. And with that, I'll back up 1 second because I have been getting a lot of calls from you guys, which is great, asking about updated forms and how to do certain things, and keeping up to date as good as I can. But as you can see, everything seemed to be set. They released these form versions out for us to view, and then they had planned on releasing them, and then bam, they get a notice from the Department of Justice. So as you can see, everything is still really fluid with this. So, nobody really has all the definite answers at this moment because things are still changing and moving around and happening, as you can see in the background. And maybe even this 17th date might get delayed. I don't know. I mean, that's what was agreed to. That's what everybody's pushing for. And it's supposed to be the drop dead date. But as you can see, now we're starting to get delays on form releases and things like that, which, were put in place to comply with this settlement agreement. So all I can say is keep up to date with things as much as you can. Really, nothing has changed at the moment. Continue doing business as you have. Keep up to date with your MLS though, because some of them are starting to make some changes in that compensation field, such as CRMLS, and you can see BAREIS now is going to be doing it on the 12th of next month. And when we get a little closer, I think once we get into August a little bit more, which is coming up quick, I think we'll get some finalization on a lot of this kind of stuff. So as I've been saying, get familiar with the buyer agents, not the buyer agents, the buyer compensation agreement. As soon as practical, I would start implementing that if you can. If you're waiting for this limited one to be released, which I'm kind of a fan of because it seems a little less aggressive from the one that I presented 2 weeks ago. It's just a 2-pager. It seems a little easier to present to the client. It makes a little bit more sense than the full-blown BRBC that we have right now. So do start brushing up though. There's tons of classes going on. There's lots of stuff. I posted a pretty good video in the Facebook group last week, maybe midweek, from just a real estate coach. It's about a 12-minute video. And it basically did a little role play with like getting that buyer agency agreement signed, whether it's going to be the limited or the current version, the BRBC. So that coach happened to be back east, but it was a good kind of back and forth coaching session on getting it implemented and kind of the tactic behind it. So I think you can skip forward a couple minutes in that and get to the actual part where he makes the sale, the pitch on getting it signed to his client. So start watching kind of some of that stuff and get some ideas from others. There's lots of information out there. Google's your friend. on, getting the BRBC in place or some sort of compensation agreement with your buyer. Don't be afraid of it, embrace it. It's a chance for us to, improve our game, be more professional. And I think buyers will start taking us a lot more serious too on the buyer side. So that's my little side tangent there. Buyer side forms that are not going to be released. The updated buyer representation agreement. They're delaying that one. It's not going away. They may or may not make revisions. So the BIPP and the BFPI, I could not locate those either. Those are probably new forms, and then they took them off the site. The ABCD, the COBR, both of those revisions are getting delayed. And then this one, the NBI PDM, couldn't locate that one. No idea what that one is. And then it looks like we have an NT for the BR. Again, it looks like they're breaking up the modification of terms, one for listing side, one for buyer representation. If you're going to make any sort of modification to your agreement, that's the form you use, the modification of terms. Seller and buyer forms, both BCA, the limited property representation. So that was the limited one I just mentioned. They're going to delay the release of that one. Like I said, at the moment, I'm kind of a fan of that one. I think it's going to be a little easier for us to get that in place with our buyer. The CBC, they're going to be updating that, and the SPBB, both of those are getting delayed. But again, all of these in their current form are still in the forms library. Just the new version is not rolling out tomorrow. So they'll keep us updated with what's, when they're going to actually release them. All right, so as far as the forms that they are releasing, I got a list of them right here. I'm not going to click on every single one of them. I'm not going to mention every single one of them, but take a look at the list, because if you're using these forms regularly, such as the RPA, there's going to be a new version of it tomorrow. It's going to have a couple little changes. So definitely pop in, take a look at the form, see what the changes are. I do have the website right here that you can click on. You're going to have to log into car.org in order to view this website, because it is through CAR. But this has a list of all of the forms being released tomorrow, and in red on those forms are the changes that they're making. So it's easy to see what has been changed. So like I do have, this is what that little page looks like. So if you wanted to see what the changes were to, let's just say the Avid, you would click on it, and hopefully it'll pull up. This is their draft. Looks like they added another bathroom line, another bedroom line. They changed up the last page here with inspection date and time, other persons present. So they moved that from, looks like the top of the form down to the end of the form. So really no major changes with the Avid, but you can see how easy it is to see what changes are being made on each form, because they just put them in red here. So I highly recommend looking at this website. Looks like everybody's still here. Let me see. All right. Hopefully you guys can hear me. I don't know what happened there. Looks like the internet cut out or Zoom crashed or something like that, but hopefully everybody's still here. Sorry about that. Let me get back to my screen here. So we were on this page. We were looking at the Avid, a couple changes. All right, so we're going to go back over here now. Hopefully, again, everybody can hear me, and we're good to go. So looks like we have something in chat real quick. To answer a chat question, when showing any property, I would, along with the buyer, broker agreement, want to negotiate commission as listing agent. Yes, agree. So, okay, back to it. Check out the forms that you use most often. It looks like there's a couple in here that are going to be new, but the RPA's got to have a little change. Avid, we just saw, is nothing crazy. Just kind of reworking the form itself. It looks like cancellation of contract. Looks like there's going to be a change on that one. Contingency of purchase. That's a fairly common one. Contingency releases. That's probably an important one. I would take a look to see what changes they made on that. Some of these other ones, probably nothing too crazy. A couple updates to like the probate and the tenant in place, the TOPA. The residential income purchase agreement, probably get an update to coincide with the RPA because they are very similar. What other big ones here? SPQ, I would definitely check in on that. And the TDS, both getting some updates. And maybe we can go over those. Not next week, because we are going to take a bye week next week. There's a lot of people traveling. 4th of July week, and 4th of July kind of falls somewhat in the middle of the week. So we're probably going to take a bye week next Monday, but the following Monday, so long as these forms actually get released tomorrow, maybe I'll cover a few of the more important ones and what they were, like the RPA and then TDS SPQ. And again, here is the link to the new forms. So let's go ahead and talk a little bit about how buyer's agent compensation will work after August 17th. And let's just hope that August 17th is still the date and we don't keep getting pushed back. So the information I got this from, I noticed that the numbering on the paragraphs stated below does not match the actual forms. And I believe that it was supposed to coincide with the released forms that were supposed to happen tomorrow, but now they're not getting released. So I apologize for that, but I didn't want to reference the current forms because it might not be valid here in another week or two. It's just, I'm not sure. So, but I'm still going to go over how the compensation is going to work. And again, if you guys have any questions, just let me know. So let's recap broker involvement again. So I went over this maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago about what that actually means and what broker involvement means. So anytime you see a form reference broker involvement, this is what it means. And that is the buyer physically entered and was shown the property by the broker. The broker showed the property to the buyer virtually, even if it's a FaceTime with them, maybe they're out of state or away or something like that. The broker submitted to the seller a signed written offer from the buyer to acquire, lease, exchange, or obtain an option on the property. The broker performed a market analysis related to the property or reviewed property-specific documents or disclosures with the buyer. The property was introduced to the buyer by the broker, or the property was one for which the broker acted on the buyer's behalf. So merely sending the buyer a list of properties is not deemed broker involvement. So you're working with a new lead or something like that, you send over a list of properties, that is not broker involvement. Unless you have documented action on the part of the broker analyzing the property for the buyer specifically and assisting the buyer in the potential acquisition of the property or communicating with the seller or seller's agent about buyer's potential acquisition of the property. So what they are also referencing here is if you're using, e-alerts for new property listings, either from MLS or a CRM or your website or something like that. And, it's automatically going out to these leads and then let's say a lead maybe has had a casual conversation with you, like, yeah, hey, send me some properties. You send it out, they end up working with another broker and buying one of those properties that you sent them. That was not considered broker involvement, based on what they're saying here. So you actually have to do some work in order to be involved or be able to have any sort of commission claim on a particular property. Quick question, not sure if you answered this. If we have a transaction in process, do we need to change the old forms already in pipeline to new ones? No, you do not. On your new, especially if it's an RPA. Now, if it's something that has already been signed, you can let it be. If it's something that has not been signed yet, so let's say, you know, the TDS, and that has not been signed yet by the seller, obviously use the new version, even if you have the old version in your zip forms folder. And in case you didn't know, they do not update automatically if they're in the folder. You will need to basically delete the one that you have in your zip forms folder and then re-add, and then that'll add in the new version. So I've seen that happen a few times where people thought they were using the newer version, but they didn't update the folder. So be sure to do that. Okay, so how will a buyer's agent earn the right to be paid under the BRBC? So the buyer must enter into an agreement to acquire the property described in the BRBC, such as single family home, whatever stipulations you put in there for the BRBC. During the BRBC specified representation period or any extension thereof, and before the effective date of cancellation, if applicable. If the buyer and buyer's agent have chosen non-exclusive buyer representation, there must also be broker involvement, which is discussed below in question 4. If the foregoing requirements are met, compensation will be due even if the transaction closes after the representation period expires or the BRBC is canceled. You'll notice that there is a safety clause, kind of like in the listing agreement on page 1. It says, you know, if within X amount of days, the property, you know, receives an offer from someone who viewed the property during the listing period, then the listing agent can be due compensation. BRBC works, you know, pretty much the same way. So if you show a property and you have broker involvement on the property, you could be entitled to the commission because you introduced the buyer to the property, you had buyer representation agreement in place. Therefore, the compensation you're entitled to the compensation at that point. So the BRBC works a lot like the listing agreement. And one of the questions that kind of keeps coming up is, I think you should view the BRBC like you view the listing agreement. This is a compensation agreement between you and the buyer. Truthfully, it doesn't really matter so much if the listing side is or is not going to offer the compensation. Same as, you know, if on the listing agreement, you're charging a certain fee for the listing, and of that fee, the seller is agreeing to allow you to offer compensation to a co-op buyer broker, right? But if you were to bring in the buyer, then you would be due the total compensation. The BRBC is very similar in the sense of it doesn't matter what the seller is or is not going to pay. If there is compensation, that gets credited to what they can owe you, depending on how you have the BRBC set up. But this is an agreement for services, a payment for services between you and the buyer. So you have to be very clear with that. when you're talking about this. And again, I've been talking about value. What's your value as a buyer's agent? Get that written down. I have some past recorded webinars on that we've done over the past couple months. They're all on the YouTube channel. It's very important that you are expressing your value to your client as to why it's good to have a buyer's agent. So, are buyer's agents entitled to compensation if, after notice of cancellation of the BRBC, the buyer enters into a contract to purchase property for which there was broker involvement prior to the effective date of cancellation? It's probably yes. If the broker provides the buyer with a written list of properties for which there was broker involvement, which must be delivered to the buyer within 5 calendar days after effective date of cancellation. The notice of broker involved properties can be used for this purpose. So I touched on this one, I think last month. I brought up this form, the NBIP. And again, this is working like the safety clause of the listing agreement. If you look at page 1 in the compensation section of the listing agreement, it says if this listing is canceled for whatever reason, and you put a little number in there on that line, I think it's number 2. I usually put 30 days, meaning if this thing gets canceled or expired, I'm still due compensation within 30 days. The caveat is I have to provide the homeowner a list of everybody that has viewed the home, right? And then that's how I could earn my compensation after a cancellation. That's your safety clause. And that's designed to keep the buyers and sellers from conspiring together and kicking the listing agent out. So this is working the same way, this notice of broker involved properties. So let's say you show this buyer X amount of properties, and they want to cancel on you for some reason. And again, this is working the same way. Maybe the buyer is trying to work with the listing agent or the seller directly or something like that to save having to pay commission, because maybe there was no commission being offered by the seller on this one, and they don't want to pay your compensation, and so they're trying to cancel on you your buyer rep agreement. Well, if you provide this form, notice of broker involved properties, and you list out the properties that you showed that buyer, you could then be entitled to, you have an enforceable agreement at that point. You can be entitled to the compensation even if the BRBC was canceled by the buyer. So if you understand how the listing agreement works that way, this is the same thing, just on the buyer side. So this is your safety clause. Now, how would you not be able to obtain compensation on those properties? If you do not deliver the list on time, or the property acquired was not on the list that you provided to them, then you would not be entitled to the compensation if the buyer cancels. So be very meticulous with your paperwork. That's all we have to protect ourselves and our commission, is very good paperwork. So use the forms that are provided to protect yourself in the event you have a buyer trying to cancel an agreement on you and things like that. Go straight over to this notice of broker involved properties form, MBIP. Put down every property you showed them on there, deliver it to them within 5 days, and then you could be entitled to your commission still. So keep that in mind. Next question. So are buyer's agents entitled to compensation if, after the end of the BRBC representation period, the buyer enters into a contract to purchase the property described in the BRBC for which there was broker involvement prior to the end of the representation period? And again, it's possibly first, the parties must have agreed on a protection period or safety clause in the BRBC, which is an option on paragraph 2D3 of the form. Now, if you go to the current BRBC, it is not 2D3 of the form, it's further back. But it appears that on the new version that's going to be coming out, it's going to be in section 2D3, that safety clause that I was just talking about. So there is a period of time in there that you'll want to make sure you fill out, just like you do on the listing agreement. Second, prior to the expiration of the BRBC or any extension thereof, the broker must deliver to the buyer a written notice of those properties for which there was broker involvement. Again, that is form NBIP. That is going to be your new friend. If you're working with slippery buyers, or they're maybe non-committal, or you find out that they're, trying to cancel this buyer representation agreement on you, you will want to get familiar with this form, and it's not a hard form. Basically, you just put in the properties that you showed them, you deliver it to them. You can deliver to them email, you can send it by mail and email, you can hand deliver it, you do all of the above, make sure it gets in their hands, basically. How can a buyer's agent get paid once the MLS can no longer be used to offer compensation from a listing broker? So there's 4 ways to get paid, and in any transaction, more than one may be applicable. So here is what that looks like. This didn't, let me see here. I might have a version of this. I'm gonna have to send over. Actually, I can go to this one. Hopefully you can still see it. There we go. So hopefully you guys can still see it. It's just a little smaller. So the method, so we're gonna look at the left column and then the right column afterwards. So the method, the buyer pays the compensation through a buyer representation agreement, okay? The CAR form to use, buyer representation and broker compensation agreement, so the BRBC. The method, the buyer negotiates for the seller to pay the compensation that the buyer owes the buyer's broker pursuant to the buyer representation agreement. You're going to use paragraph 3G3 in the residential purchase agreement and document that agreement with the seller's payment to buyer broker. So SPBB, that goes hand in hand. When you click that box on 3G3 of the RPA, it's going to add in the SPBB, and that's where you're going to put in the amount that you have agreed to on your buyer representation agreement. So if it's 2.5%, if it's 2%, whatever it is, you're going to put that on the SPBB. And I did go over that form that is in our YouTube channel as well a little while back, but we're going to cover it again, especially after things finalize, mid-August, hopefully, fingers crossed, they don't change it on us again. We will go over like an entire process of what this is going to look like again, just to be, kind of clear, because they are throwing a lot of forms at us. It's hard to keep up with some of these, but make note of the ones that are going to be, important moving forward with protecting your compensation. The seller's broker pays the compensation to the buyer's broker. Cooperating broker compensation agreement, so you use form CBC. Some of you are familiar with that currently. I usually recommend, or have recommended in the past, to use that if you're in writing an offer on an out of area MLS that you're not a part of. If the seller is unrepresented, the buyer's broker can contract directly with the seller for payment. You're going to use a single party compensation agreement. That's a lesser known form. It's been around a while. I noticed that they're making some changes to that one as well. So take a look at that one. These are the 4 forms that I would recommend getting familiar with, because these are the 4 ways you can get paid as a buyer's agent. So get familiar with, obviously, the BRBC or the limited, if they end up releasing that again, the one we covered a couple weeks ago. This section in the RPA coincides with the BRBC, basically. If you're not familiar with the CBC or the single party compensation agreement, get familiar with those as well. Now I'm going to click back over to the PDF because it shows bigger. How can a buyer's agent ensure that they'll actually receive the agreed upon compensation? So kind of like it's handled on the listing side. Currently, this will be handled through escrow. In paragraph 4E of the BRBC, which it is not 4E, it's actually further down, and I think it was it was F, I think. It talks about this. The buyer irrevocably assigns to the broker the compensation out of the buyer's funds in escrow. In paragraph 14A of the RPA, the buyer agrees to pay the broker as specified in their agreement, and that amount is payable upon close of escrow. And in paragraph 19D of the RPA, escrow agrees, 1, to pay the compensation due as long as the agreement is provided to escrow, and 2, the compensation disbursement is an irrevocable assignment. So they put that clause in there for us. We don't need to do anything. It's in the BRBC and also in the RPA. So that's already pre-printed in there for us. We don't need to do anything. We have that. If the agreement is signed, that is protecting our ability to collect the commission through escrow. So you're probably going to start seeing escrow asking for a copy of the BRBC or similar form that we just went over, one of the 4. So they know how much the buyer owes you in compensation. And then again, if the seller is offering a concession towards it, then it'll just be deducted accordingly, or allocated accordingly. Does a buyer's agent need to work for a buyer who does not have the funds to pay them? So let's say you get a call and these buyers really want to work with you, and they want you to show them houses and have all these demands and things like that. You're not required to work with them if they don't have the money to pay you. I mean, this is, how it works. I mean, you're not going to list a property if there was no ability for the seller to pay you. So it's the same thing on the buyer side. Remember, you are providing a service here. An attorney would not take on a client if there was no ability to be paid. Some of them taking on a contingency if they think there's a really high likelihood that the case is winnable and they're going to get some sort of compensation. But if you don't think that there's any way that you're going to be able to get paid, you don't have to work with the buyer. Question came up in chat. So if the seller is paying the buyer broker commission, what do we put in the buyer broker agreement? And again, we don't want to commingle these two. You have to separate these in your brain. These are 2 completely different things. One, the listing side can can contribute to what is owed. Credit is what it is, but the buyer broker agreement is an agreement between you and the buyer for payment for your services. So it says that if the seller is paying a commission to the buyer broker, that it would be credited to what the buyer owes you. But this is an agreement between you and the buyer. So we don't want to keep commingling and put it back on the seller. Well, what if? Well, what if? This is an agreement. Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, you are agreeing to pay me for my services for representing you on the purchase of this house. Now, if the seller is offering some sort of compensation, then that is going to get credited to what you owe me. But you have to remember that this is the agreement, just like the listing side. It doesn't matter if there's a buyer or not. The seller owes you that full commission amount you have in there, regardless of if a buyer comes in. You're saying that if a buyer comes in, I'm going to offer them compensation out of here. But if they don't, I'm entitled to this full amount because this is what I'm charging you to list your property. Buyer broker agreement, same thing. This is what I'm charging you for representing you in this purchase. If I get compensated somewhere else, it'll get credited against what you owe me. So try and think of it more that way of, relating it to the listing agreement side, because this is very, very similar on how it works. What do you put in the buyer broker agreement? Let's see. We can go over the BRBC, or if you want to look at it, but again, you're putting in what you're charging for your services. So if you are charging 2.5%, it technically doesn't really matter what the seller is offering you, because you're charging them that. If the seller is offering you 2%, you're only going to make 2% if that's how you have it written in there, because you can't make more. Well, actually, sorry, other way around. If the seller's offering you 2% and you have 2.5% in the BRBC, you're charging your client 2.5, the seller's only offering 2, technically the buyer still owes you 0.5%. Now, if it's the other way, if you write 2% in the BRBC and the seller's offering 2.5%, you can only make 2%. You can't make more than what is the agreement between you and the buyer. It says if the seller is paying the commission, then we put that in the BRBC. No, technically that is where in the RPA, you're going to click that the seller agrees to pay the amount in the BRBC. So that's, if you go up here again, right here. Nope, sorry. In the RPA on the second page of the RPA is where you put in that they are going to pay the amount, and then that attaches the SPBB form, and that is where you disclose to the seller how much, what the agreement is between you and the buyer of compensation for services. And then by checking that box in the RPA, you're saying that seller, you are agreeing to pay this amount. So, and if they agree to the RPA, then that's when you get paid. So the seller has no relevance in the BRBC. It's actually in the RPA where they state that they agree to pay what you have agreed to with your buyer in the BRBC. So hopefully that makes sense. The BRBC is between you and the buyer. The seller has no bearing as far as the compensation goes, aside from the fear of the buyer having to pay you if the seller does not pay. But really, they are hiring you and they're going to pay you a fee. So now if they choose not to make offers or look at homes that have no seller concession offered, then that is up to them. You can't steer them away from those homes, obviously, but they might be asking if there's going to be a seller concession offered. So hopefully that answers the question. Don't commingle the two. The agreement, the BRBC, is the agreement between you and the buyer for compensation for services, just like the listing agreement is the agreement between you and the seller. So next question, yes, I understand, but what do we put in the BRBC for the commission if the seller's paying it? So do you know ahead of time what the seller is offering? Like, do you already have the deal kind of put together? Is that what you're referring to? And then filling out the BRBC before you make the offer? So you already know what the seller's offering. So just put that amount in the BRBC, I guess, because you have inside knowledge of what the seller's offering. So that does not remove the responsibility of the buyer to pay you. Okay, so because it is an agreement between you and the buyer. All right, looks like we got through that one. Okay. Does the buyer's agent need to work for a buyer? So, okay, we did that. So paragraph 2F of the BRBC, again, these numbers are off a little bit. Let's give it just a few days, maybe they'll roll these back out. This paragraph is in there, but it's not 2F. That's on the new version that was supposed to come out tomorrow. Of the BRBC, gives a buyer 5 days to show the buyer, the broker, buyer's agent, proof that the buyer has sufficient funds to pay the broker. If the buyer does not do so, the broker may cancel the BRBC pursuant to paragraph 9B1. So basically, you're asking for proof of funds from your buyer now to make sure they can pay you, So, and if they cannot pay you in some way, or it can't be negotiated, or you don't think it's going to be negotiated with the seller for whatever reason, then you don't have to work with the buyer. They're not forcing us to work with buyers for free, is kind of what this is getting at. Buyers who know they lack the funds to pay the broker should check the applicable box in paragraph 2F of the BRBC. If that box is checked, the broker is given permission to seek compensation from the seller's broker and use paragraph 3G3 of the RPA. That's the box you're going to check, which adds the SPBB, where you put the compensation in of the RPA to ask the seller to pay. If the buyer's broker is not able to arrange for sufficient compensation through those other sources, the broker may withdraw from the transaction. In that case, even though the buyer's broker would not be entitled to compensation if the buyer completes that purchase, the broker should be relieved of any potential liability if the buyer pursues the transaction, because the broker would no longer represent the buyer on the potential purchase. The BRBC would still be valid, however, if the buyer pursues other properties that fit the parameters of the BRBC. If the buyer's broker intends to withdraw from the transaction, the broker should do so in writing, provided to the buyer, the seller, and the seller's broker as soon as possible, and preferably before the buyer enters into a binding contract with the seller. So that's what will happen if they start to pursue a property where maybe the seller is not going to compensate. They're going to move forward with it. You're not going to represent them because you're not going to do it for free. And you want to withdraw from that and not be bound to have to represent them for free. They're saying you can do that. And this might be a scenario that comes up. So you're going to want to probably vet the buyers a little bit as you start working with them, and make sure that there is going to be an ability to get paid somehow, or that that they can only work with you if the seller's agent is compensating you, or if the seller is compensating you. You'll have to know that it's a little bit of a risk on your part, that you may come across a property that they absolutely love and want to move forward on, and there's no compensation offered, and they can't offer to pay you. So at that point, you're probably going to walk away. So there's still a little bit of a risk factor there. So I'm including the link to an extended version of this that deals with more than just how a buyer broker can get compensated after the August 17th date. There was other knowledge in there. It's probably about twice as long as what I just went through. If you want to check it out, you can click that. You'll probably need to log into CAR. But I'm going to post this PDF in the Facebook group as usual. That way there you can go through it. These are clickable links. They'll take you straight over to the page you want to go to do a little bit of research on, the new forms release coming out. And then if you want to look at this, it's kind of a fact sheet, I guess. It was a few pages long on the BRBC and how it's all going to work. So hopefully it stays the same. The BRBC, was one of the ones that is being held up as far as the new revision goes. That does not make the new one unenforceable. If you're using it, keep using it. If you're not using it, start using it or get familiar with it in case you need to use it. You really want to start implementing these soon. And I highly, highly, highly suggest, attending any little webinars or, classes at the board or anything like that about, working with buyers and the buyer representation agreement, because they'll give you good tidbits on, how to present these to your buyers, putting together a buyer presentation if you're going to go that route. Everybody's going to be attacking this a little bit different. Really, it's going to be a lot about confidence and showing your value and your worth as a buyer's agent. So if you have not put together that list of what your value is as a buyer's agent, I would highly recommend jotting that down, getting to know it so that you can speak fluently when a buyer starts asking you these questions. So that's all I got for today. And like I said, we'll post this up in the Facebook group, the replay, as well as the this PDF. And reminder, we're not going to have a webinar next week. Next Monday, we have a bye week. We'll send out a reminder that we're having a bye week. Other than that, hopefully everybody has a great week, and give us a call if you need anything. We'll talk to you later. Have a great day.